The first cool light over Laurel Canyon came in low and gold that Thursday morning, sliding through the eucalyptus and laying long soft shadows across the gravel drive of a modest craftsman house tucked into the hillside above the road. It was a quiet kind of house for a man who could have bought any house in Los Angeles. 2 bedrooms, a deep front porch, a workbench in the garage that smelled of engine oil and cedar, and a lemon tree by the steps that had been there long before he signed the deed. The man who lived there liked it that way. His name was Keanu Reeves, and at 8:31 that morning he was standing on his own porch in a faded gray hoodie and worn riding boots, holding a cup of black coffee, watching a transport van he did not recognize idle at the bottom of the drive. He was not a man who alarmed easily. He had spent a lifetime learning to be still, to wait, to let a moment show him what it was, before he decided what to do with it. The van down the hill was a plain white panel truck, with a small magnetic sign on the door that read Coastline Moto Transport, and a man in a dark windbreaker stood beside the open rear ramp, looking up toward the house, with the patient posture of someone who had been told to wait somewhere specific and intended to do it well. Keanu took a slow sip of his coffee. Everything looked exactly as it should. That was the first thing. Everything looked exactly as it should. The plan for the day had been simple and pleasant. He was going to ride his motorcycle up the coast to Big Sur, a long, unhurried run along Highway 1, to spend 3 quiet days at a friend's cabin and clear his head before a board meeting the following week. His bike was a custom machine he had helped design himself, built by hand at the small company he had founded years earlier, and he treated it the way some men treat an old dog. The shop had called 2 days ago to say a transport service would come at 8:40 to do a final safety check and escort him to the highway, since a stretch of the canyon road was closed for repaving. He had thought nothing of it. Why would he? He set his coffee on the porch rail and started down the steps, and that was when the young man came out of the side garden. He came fast and low, the way a person moves when they do not want to be seen, from the road, ducking past the rosemary and the old stone planter, and he reached the bottom of the steps before Keanu had crossed half the drive. He was 19, lean, in a thin blue work shirt, with dirt on the knees of his jeans. Keanu knew him. His name was Theo Connolly, the son of Ruth, the woman who had kept his house and tended his garden for the past 7 years. Theo helped his mother on weekends and mornings before his classes at the community college down in the flats. Keanu had spoken to him maybe a dozen times. He had always liked the boy's seriousness. "Don't get on the bike," Theo said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, walk with me. Don't let the man down there see your face change." Keanu stopped. He did not look at the van. He looked at Theo, at the way the young man's jaw was set, at the faint tremor in his hands, at eyes that had clearly not closed for sleep the night before. There are kinds of fear that a person performs, and kinds they cannot fake, and Keanu had learned the difference a long time ago. This was the second kind. "All right," he said quietly. "Walk where?" "The garage. Like we're getting something. Slow." So they walked. Keanu turned, unhurried, and ambled back up toward the open garage, as though he had forgotten a wrench, and Theo fell in beside him, with his head down. Behind them, the man at the van shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the small, restless motion of someone who has been told to expect a thing and is beginning to wonder why it has not yet happened. Keanu felt it on the back of his neck. He did not turn around. Inside the garage, in the shadow between the workbench and the half-finished frame of a second motorcycle, Keanu crouched down, so his eyes were level with the young man's. "Tell me," he said, slowly. "Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." Theo took a breath that shook on the way in. "Last night I was here late. My mom asked me to fix the timer on the back irrigation line, so I was out by the tool shed past 9. The kitchen window was open. Mr. Hatcher was inside." He paused. "And a woman I never saw before." Keanu kept his face very still. Marlon Hatcher was not a man whose name belonged in a sentence with the word warning. Marlon was the closest friend he had on this earth. They had met in 1991 on a low-budget film called Titiline, 2 unknowns sharing a trailer, and in the 32 years since, Marlon had become his business manager, the executor of his affairs, the brother he had chosen when the family he was born to had thinned out around him. Marlon had a key to this house. Marlon had keys to everything. What did they say? Keanu asked. They were talking about you. Theo's voice dropped further. They said it has to look like an accident. They said the road past the Bixby Bend, where the guardrail's low, where cars have gone over before. They said the transport guy would ride ahead, and there'd be a second car, and that the brake line on your bike was already done. The woman said it pays out after the certificate clears. 71 million and change. She said a number, exact. She said by next spring it would all be settled and nobody would ask questions, because nobody can test a single vehicle accident on a road. That kills people anyway. A faint click came from the canyon below, a car door somewhere, ordinary and far away. In the dim garage, a single mote of dust turned slowly in the one blade of light coming through the side window, and for a long moment neither of them breathed. Keep that number in your mind. 71 million and change. It will come back. You're sure it was Marlon? Keanu said. It was not quite a question. I'd know his voice anywhere, Theo said. He's been coming here 7 years. He bought my mom a coat the Christmas before last. The young man's face crumpled for half a second and then pulled itself straight. That's why I almost didn't believe it. That's why I didn't sleep. I kept thinking I dreamed it. But you didn't tell your mother. No, sir. She had the radio on. She didn't hear anything. And I thought, if I tell her, she'll say I imagined it. And if I tell nobody, then later, nobody believes me. He swallowed. So I did something. I don't know if it was stupid. He reached into the breast pocket of his work shirt and pulled out an old phone, a cheap Model 2 or 3 generations behind, the screen webbed, with a crack along one corner, and held by a strip of clear tape. He held it out the way a person hands over something fragile they are afraid to be blamed for. My mom gave me this when she upgraded, Theo said. It still records. I held it by the window. I was scared the whole time. Keanu took the phone the way a man takes a piece of glass pulled from a wound. On the screen was a single audio file, time-stamped the night before, 9 minutes and 38 seconds long. He looked at it for a moment, and then he pressed play, and he held it close to his ear, and he turned the volume up. The first sound was the small domestic clatter of a kitchen, a glass set on a counter, a chair drawn back. Then a man's voice, low and easy, a voice Keanu had heard across 32 years of dinners and airports and hospital waiting rooms. It was Marlon. There was no mistaking it. He was saying that it had to look ordinary, that Keanu had to get on the bike himself, willingly, that nothing could be forced because a forensic team would find force inside a day. Then a woman's voice, cooler, precise, the voice of someone reading from a list she had memorized long ago. She said the bend on Highway 1 was perfect. She said the brake had been bled to fail slow, not all at once, so it would read as panic and not sabotage. She said the escort would slow at the right moment to set the timing. And then she said the part that made the floor of the world tilt under Keanu's boots. She said the audit was the problem. She said once the independent accountants opened the Ironwood books in March, Marlon's 11.9 million in withdrawals over 3 years would surface, and there was no story on earth that covered 11.9 million. She said the only clean exit was the policy. The Keyman insurance the company carried on its founder's life. 35.75 million in base coverage, doubled to 71.5 on accidental death, paid to the company, and from the company, through the trust Marlon controlled, as executor, into an account she had already prepared. She said it, as calmly as a person orders coffee. Then Marlon's voice again, quieter, almost tired. He said, he trusts me with all of it. He never even looks. And the woman laughed, soft and short, and said that was the whole reason it would work. Keanu stopped the recording. He did not need the rest. He stayed crouched on the cold concrete of his own garage, with the cracked phone in his hand, and his pulse loud in his ears, and he understood, in the slow, distant way a man understands very bad news he cannot afford to show, that whatever life he had been living, when he woke up, that morning had quietly ended sometime in the dark, while he slept. Here is the thing you have to understand about him. He did not feel rage. Not yet. He had spent decades being underestimated, being told he was simple, because he was kind, and he had learned that the calmest man in the room is usually the one still thinking. So he thought. Theo, he said, listen to me carefully. Does your mother know you recorded this? No, sir. Good. Keep it that way for now. Not because she'd do anything wrong. Because the fewer people who know, the fewer people are in danger. He slid the phone carefully into the inside pocket of his hoodie. You may have just saved my life, and I'm not going to forget it. But right now I need you to do the hardest thing. I need you to go back to whatever you were doing and look completely normal. Can you do that? The young man's eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. I can try. Trying is enough. Keanu put a hand on his shoulder, briefly. Go. And Theo went back out into the garden, picking up a coil of hose, as though the morning were the same as any other, and from the corner of his eye Keanu watched the man at the van check his watch. The man at the van. Look at him again, because something about him had been wrong, before Keanu had words for it. He was the right height, and the right build for Dale Whitaker, the mechanic who had transported Keanu's bikes for the better part of a decade, the man who had built half the engine in that garage with his own hands. He wore the dark windbreaker Dale always wore. But Dale Whitaker wore a worn leather bootlace around his right wrist, with a small, dull silver medallion knotted into it, a thing his late brother had given him, a thing he never took off, not to wash dishes, not to sleep. Keanu had seen it 10,000 times. The man at the van had a bare wrist. It was such a small thing. That is how these things always are. The whole architecture of a man's death, and the seam, where it failed, was a bootlace. Keanu took out his own phone and walked deeper into the garage, out of sight of the road, and he called the one number he trusted without condition. The line rang twice. You're supposed to be on the highway by now, said the voice on the other end. Dale Whitaker. Alive. Confused. Ordinary. I thought you left an hour ago. Coastline texted me they were covering the run. Dale, Keanu said quietly. Coastline didn't text you. Somebody made it look like they did. I need you to stay exactly where you are, and I need you to not call anyone, and I need you to trust me for the next 10 minutes. Can you do that? There was a pause, the pause of a man hearing a tone in a friend's voice he had never heard before. Yeah, Dale said. Yeah, I can do that. Good. I'll call you back. Now hold on, because what happened next was the part that decided everything. Keanu's phone lit up in his hand before he could lower it. A single name on the screen. Marlon. And he understood, in that same cold, distant way, that not answering would tell Marlon everything. The man would call the imposter at the gate. The imposter would walk up to the house. Whatever sliver of advantage Keanu had right now would dissolve into the canyon air. So he pressed the green button, and he made his voice into the easiest, most ordinary version of itself. Hey, Marlon. There you are. Warm, amused, a brother's voice. The transport guy texted me, said you're still up at the house. You didn't fall back asleep on me, did you? No. Keanu let himself laugh low. I left a charger inside, came back up for it. Heading out in a couple minutes. Take it easy on that coast road, all right? Those bends are no joke. A small pause. A breath. Call me when you get up there. I worry about you. I worry about you. Keanu closed his eyes for 1 second. I will, he said. Talk soon. He ended the call and stood in the dim garage and felt the strangeness of it settle over him like cold water. 32 years. A man who had sat with him in a hospital corridor on the worst night of his life. A man who had cried at the funeral of someone they both loved. That man had just told him to be careful on the bends. He did not go to the gate. He went out the side door of the garage, the one that opened, onto the steep path down to the lower road, the path the gardeners used, and he texted Dale a single line. Bring your truck to the bottom of the fire road in 20 minutes. Come alone. Then he did one more thing. He needed to see it, with his own eyes, because some part of him, the part that had loved Marlon Hatcher like blood, still needed to be shown. He climbed back up, through the garden, quiet, close to the wall, ducking under the kitchen windows the way he had not done since he was a boy hiding in his grandmother's orchard, and from the cover of the trellis at the corner of the house, he could see down the slope to the small turnout below the property, where guests sometimes parked. There was a car there, a clean gray sedan, and leaning against it, talking to the man in the windbreaker, was a woman Keanu had never seen, dark-haired, composed, in an unremarkable charcoal coat, the kind of woman built to be forgettable. She checked her watch. She looked up at the house. and Marlon Hatcher's silver pickup truck was parked behind the sedan, and the driver's door was open, and Marlon was sitting sideways in the seat, with one foot on the ground, on the phone, smiling at something the woman had said. That was the whole of it. There was nothing left to need. He went down the fire road on foot. 23 minutes later, Dale Whitaker's battered shop truck rolled to a stop at the bottom of the hill, and Keanu climbed in, and Dale looked at him and said only, "You want to tell me what's going on, or you want me to drive?" "Drive first," Keanu said. "Larchmont. There's a coffee place with a green awning. My lawyer's meeting us." They drove. Dale, to his great credit, did not push. He had spent 20 years around people, with money and the trouble money attracts, and he knew the shape of a thing. That took planning. After a few blocks, he said, quietly, "That guy at the van wasn't from Coastline." "No," Keanu said. "And the brake on your bike. Don't touch it. Leave it exactly how it is. The people who'll want to look at it later need it untouched." Dale's hands tightened on the wheel, and he drove the rest of the way, without a word, and the city slid past the windows looking exactly as it had the day before: mothers with strollers, a man rolling up the steel shutter of a hardware store, a delivery truck double-parked by a bakery, and none of it knew that a man had nearly vanished from the world that morning, and none of it would have noticed if he had. Edmund Frost was already at the corner table when they walked in. He was 64, narrow, gray, dressed in the same plain dark suit he wore to every meeting, whether it cost $10 or $10 million, and he had been Keanu's attorney for 21 years. He stood, and the two men shook hands in the brief, careful way of people who had known each other long enough to skip everything else, and Dale took a seat by the window, with his back to the wall, watching the street. "Tell me," Edmund said. So Keanu told him. He told it in a flat, efficient voice, the way you report a loss to a board, leaving nothing out: the young man, and the open window, and the cracked phone, the brake line, the bend on Highway 1, the bare wrist, where a medallion should have been, the gray sedan, Marlon sitting in his truck smiling. Edmund did not interrupt once. He listened the way good lawyers listen, which is to say he wrote nothing down and missed nothing. When Keanu finished, Edmund was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into a leather folder and laid 3 printed pages on the table. "I want you to understand something," he said. "I started pulling your files the minute you called me from the road, and I have not liked a single thing I've found. So let me show you, and then we decide what to do, and we do it before they understand that you understand." The first page was the Keyman insurance policy carried by Ironwood Cycle Works on the life of its founder. Edmund tapped it. "Original coverage, 8 years ago, for million. Standard. Routine. I was in the room. 14 months ago, it was amended. Base coverage raised to 35.75 million, and accidental death rider added. That doubles the payout to 71.5 under specific circumstances, and the beneficiary language simplified, so the proceeds route to the company, and then, by the terms of your trust, to the executor for distribution." He let that sit. The executor is Marlon. 71.5. The exact number, from a cracked phone in a garage. Keanu felt it land in his chest like a stone dropped down a well. "I didn't approve that amendment," Keanu said. "You signed it." Edmund slid the second page across. There at the bottom was Keanu's signature, the particular loop he put at the end, witnessed and notarized in an office in Pasadena. "Except you didn't. I called the notary this morning. He retired 4 months ago and moved to Arizona and hasn't answered his phone in 2 weeks. And according to his log, you signed this on a Tuesday in February of last year." Edmund looked at him evenly. "Where were you that Tuesday?" Keanu thought. "Toronto. Pre-production. I was there the whole month." "I know. I checked before I asked." Edmund folded his hands. "Which means someone took your signature off a real document and put it on a false one in front of a notary who has conveniently disappeared. That is not a money problem. That is a body of evidence." The third page was a summary of withdrawals from the Ironwood operating accounts and the trust over 3 years, traced and flagged, and the total at the bottom was $11,920,000. The number on the recording, almost to the dollar. Keanu looked at the page for a long time. A spoon clinked against a cup somewhere behind him. Someone laughed near the counter. The ordinary warm noise of a coffee shop went on around the worst page he had ever read. "He was stealing from me," Keanu said. And then the audit was coming, and the only way to bury it was to bury me. That's what it looks like. Who's the woman? That, said Edmund, is the part you need to brace for. Stay with this. Because the woman was not an accomplice Marlon had stumbled into. She was the reason any of it was possible. Edmund had called an investigator the moment he'd hung up with Keanu, a woman named Nora Pell, who had worked for him for 15 years and was very good and very quiet, and Nora had already pulled the gray sedan's plates and run the windbreaker man's face against a database Edmund did not ask her how she'd accessed. The woman's name was Celeste Dunmore. She had no criminal record, which was itself remarkable, because in the past 9 years 2 men close to her had died in accidents. A husband in Scottsdale, Arizona, found drowned in a backyard pool, an accidental death policy, no contest, paid in full. A fiancé in Naperville, Illinois, a single vehicle crash on a county road at night, a generous settlement, no charges. Both cases closed. Both clean. Both, on paper, simply the kind of bad luck that finds some people more than once. She finds men with money and trust and weak oversight, Edmund said. Then she finds the person already inside their life. The accountant, the manager, the brother. He paused. She didn't recruit a stranger to kill you, Keanu. She found Marlon 18 months ago when he was drowning in his own theft, and she gave him a door out. And he walked through it. Keanu sat very still. Out the window the street went by. He thought, strangely, of a night 32 years ago, a cheap trailer, 2 broke kids splitting a sandwich, Marlon saying he'd never forget it if Keanu spotted him for gas to get to the next job. He had spotted him. He had been spotting him, in one way or another, ever since. I want to know everything, Keanu said. Who she's hurt, how long this has run. And I want the people who can still be saved from her to be saved. He looked up. But I'm not going to disappear, and I'm not going to run, and I'm not going to let them know I know. We're going to let them think it's happening exactly the way they planned. Edmund studied him. You want to give them the road. I want to give them the road, Keanu said. With the right people waiting on it. What happened over the next 31 hours was the careful, quiet work of turning a trap inside out, and almost none of it was loud. Edmund Frost made 2 phone calls from the back of the coffee shop. The first was to a detective named Marion Kessler, a woman in her 50s, with short gray hair and the patient, watchful face of someone who had seen the worst of people and decided long ago not to let it surprise her, who had once helped Edmund untangle a fraud that crossed 3 states. He played her 90 seconds of a recording from a cracked phone, and then he sent her 3 scan pages, and Detective Kessler stopped being patient and started moving. The Scottsdale and Naperville files were pulled within the hour. A magistrate who owed nobody any favors looked at the evidence and signed what needed signing. The second call Keanu made himself. He called Marlon back at 4:14 that afternoon, and he told him the run to Big Sur had spooked him, that the canyon closure had thrown his nerves, that he wanted to do the ride first thing in the morning instead, fresh, in daylight, the same route, the same escort. And Marlon, warm as ever, said that was smart, that was the right call, that he should never ride tired. And Celeste Dunmore, listening on the other end of the room, did not know that the single most dangerous thing about Keanu Reeves had always been how easy he was to underestimate. That night Keanu did not sleep at the Craftsman house. He stayed at a hotel under Edmund's name, and Dale stayed in the next room, and a young man named Theo Connolly was driven, quietly, with his mother, to a relative's house in Pasadena, because the one thing Keanu would not gamble was the safety of the person who had warned him. Before they left, he found Theo in the hotel hallway and crouched again to his level the way he had in the garage. Whatever happens tomorrow, Keanu said, you did the bravest thing I've ever watched a person do. You heard something terrible, and you didn't look away, and you didn't decide it wasn't your business. Most grown men I know couldn't have done it. Theo's chin trembled. What if I'm wrong about all of it? You're not. Keanu smiled, tired and real. But the fact that you're still worried you might be is exactly why I trust you. In the morning the sky, over the coast was a pale clean blue, with a thin line of fog still lying on the water, and at 8:42 a.m. man on a hand-built motorcycle rolled out of Laurel Canyon and turned north toward Highway 1. He was the right height and the right build. He wore Keanu's helmet and Keanu's scuffed leather jacket, and from any distance at all he was Keanu Reeves. He was not. He was a state highway patrol officer named Caleb Brunner, who had done 2 tours and ridden motorcycles since he was 16, and the brake line on the bike had been quietly and perfectly restored the night before by Dale Whitaker, and there were 4 unmarked vehicles spread across 11 miles of coast road, and a helicopter holding well out over the water where no one on the ground would think to look up. Behind the decoy rider, a white transport van kept a careful distance. Ahead and behind that, a gray sedan threaded through the morning traffic. Marlon Hatcher was not on the road. Marlon was at home in Brentwood, in a quiet house, waiting for a phone call that would tell him his oldest friend had gone over the rail at the Bixby Bend, and that he was now a very wealthy and very grieving man. The road narrowed. The trees fell away, and the cliffs opened up, and the Pacific spread out flat and silver to the edge of the world. The bend came into view, the long curve, where the guardrail dipped low, where the ocean was 300 feet straight down. The gray sedan accelerated. The transport van moved up, and at the exact moment they meant to close the box closed on them. It happened fast and almost silent. No sirens, not at first. 2 black SUVs pulled across both lanes ahead of the bend. A third came up hard from a side turnout behind. The sedan braked and was hemmed before the driver's hands finished moving on the wheel. The van had nowhere to go. Men and women in plain clothes stepped out with the calm, practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times, and Celeste Dunmore was pulled from the passenger seat of the gray sedan onto the gravel shoulder, with the ocean roaring below, and the man with the bare wrist was face down on the road, and it was over in under 90 seconds. Caleb Brunner rolled the motorcycle to a stop a quarter mile up, lifted the helmet, and exhaled. And in a quiet house in Brentwood, at 9:51 that morning, Marlon Hatcher's phone rang, and he answered it expecting the worst day of his life dressed up as good news. And instead he heard Detective Marion Kessler tell him, in a flat, even voice, that there were officers in his driveway, and that he should come outside, with his hands, where they could see them, and that he should not say anything at all. He did not run. He did not call anyone. By the time they brought him out of the house, he had stopped pretending, and when they walked him past the car, he stopped for the briefest second and looked back at the home he would not be returning to, and his face was not defiant, and it was not pleading. It was the face of a man watching a long sentence finally arrive at its period. The case moved faster than anyone expected. Celeste Dunmore was charged, within 48 hours, with conspiracy, attempted murder, insurance fraud, and identity fraud, and when investigators went back into the closed files in Scottsdale and Naperville with new eyes and a living witness pattern, both cases reopened. The man with the bare wrist, whose real name was Royce Tanner, made a deal and named everyone, because men like Royce Tanner always do. The brake line, preserved exactly as Keanu had ordered, told its own story to a forensic engineer who had no patience for coincidence. And the cornerstone of all of it, the thing the prosecutors built their case around, was 9 minutes and 38 seconds of audio recorded by a frightened 19-year-old through an open kitchen window on a phone, with a cracked screen held together by tape. Celeste Dunmore contested nothing and admitted nothing. She sat through every proceeding with the composed, unreadable face of a woman who had decided long ago that other people's lives were simply weather she passed through, and when her own attorney advised a plea, she took it the way she took everything, as a transaction, a cost of doing business. She never once looked at the man she had tried to erase. To the end she behaved as though she had done nothing that required looking at. Some people are like that. The mirror holds no terror for them because they have learned never to glance in it. Marlon Hatcher was different. And here is where the story does the thing the story came to do. Keanu went to see him once, before the sentencing, in a visiting room that smelled of disinfectant and old coffee, and he did not entirely know why he went, except that 32 years does not let go of a man cleanly, and he needed to look at the face one more time. Marlon was thinner. The easy warmth was gone, and what was left underneath it was something Keanu had never seen on him, a kind of nakedness, a man with nowhere left to perform. For a long moment neither of them spoke. A guard shifted his weight by the door. A fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead, and in the gray air between them a particle of dust drifted down through the light and seemed, for a held breath, to stop. I keep telling myself a version of it, where I'm not the worst thing I've ever heard about, Marlon finally said. His voice was rough, and I can't get there. I've tried. There's no page I can turn to where this isn't what I am. Keanu said nothing. He had learned that silence is sometimes the most honest thing you can offer a person. I started taking the money to cover a hole, Marlon went on, staring at his own hands. Then the hole got bigger, and then it wasn't a hole anymore. It was a grave, and she found me at the bottom of it and told me there was a way to climb out, and the way out was over you. His jaw worked. And the thing I can't survive, the thing that's going to be in the room with me every night for the rest of my life, is that you'd have given me the money. If I just walked into your kitchen and told you the truth, you'd have written the check and made me coffee and asked if I was okay. I knew that. I knew it the whole time, and I chose this instead. He looked up then, and his eyes were wet, and there was no angle left in him, no excuse, no policy to hide behind. You never once treated me like I was less than you, Marlon said. Not for 32 years. You never made me feel like the poor friend, the manager, the help. And the boy who saved you, that kid in the garden, you knew his name. You knew his mother's name. You bought her a coat. You're the only rich man I ever met who looked at people like they were real. His voice broke. I traded the one person who ever saw me. For her. For money. I understand exactly what I did. I just don't understand how I let myself become someone who could do it. Keanu sat with that for a long moment. Then he stood, and he put his hand flat on the cold steel table, not in forgiveness, not in welcome, but in something more like grief. I hope you find a way to carry it, he said quietly. I really do. But I can't carry it for you. Not this time. And he walked out, and he did not look back, and that was the last time the two of them were ever in a room together. Marlon Hatcher pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and to a long column of financial crimes. And at his sentencing, he did something almost no one in that courtroom expected. He declined to let his attorney argue for leniency. He stood, and in a steady voice he told the court that the man he had tried to kill was the best person he had ever known, that the crime had no defense and deserved none, and that whatever years they gave him would be fewer than he owed. The judge, who had heard 10,000 performances of remorse and could smell a false one across a courtroom, looked at him for a long moment and said that genuine recognition did not undo a single thing he had done, but that it was, at least, the beginning of becoming a person again. Then she handed down a sentence that meant Marlon Hatcher would be an old man before he saw an unbarred sky. He served it quietly. He wrote one letter to Keanu in the first year, for pages, and it did not ask for anything, not forgiveness, not a reply, not a visit. It only said, in plain words, that he understood now what he had thrown away, and that he was sorry in the only way that mattered, which was without expecting it to fix anything. Keanu read it twice, and put it in a drawer, and never answered it, and somehow the not answering was its own kind of mercy, because there was nothing he could have written that would not have been a lie in one direction or the other. In the weeks and months after, the small world around Keanu Reeves quietly rearranged itself, not the way a life changes after a death, but the way a house changes after a long fever finally breaks. Ironwood Cycle Works survived. The independent auditors came in March, as planned, and what they found was a company that had been robbed by the man meant to protect it, and a founder who had no interest in revenge against the 80-some people who built motorcycles by hand and had done nothing wrong. Keanu covered the shortfall himself, every dollar of the $11,920,000, and he restructured everything so that no single person would ever again hold the keys to all the doors. He hired a chief financial officer named Glenda Hart, a sharp, unsentimental woman who had run finance for a private medical center in San Diego for 2 decades, and who told him in her first week that she intended to make herself impossible to fool, and he told her that was the most romantic thing anyone had said to him in years. Dale Whitaker was given a permanent partnership in the shop, a thing he argued against for 20 minutes out of pure stubbornness, before he accepted, and the silver medallion on the leather bootlace around his wrist became, without anyone ever saying so, the unofficial mark of the people in that building who could be trusted with anything. Ruth Connolly stayed. Keanu asked her if she wanted to, and she took 3 days to think about it, and then she said yes, and she moved out of the small staff cottage into a real house at the edge of the property with a fireplace and a room of her own that got the morning sun. And Theo Connolly enrolled that fall in a 4-year university up the coast to study engineering, and Keanu paid for it, and for whatever came after it, and he refused to let anyone call it a gift. He called it an investment in someone who had already proven what kind of man he was going to be. What is true is that the most dangerous person in your life rarely arrives as a stranger. He does not come over the wall in the dark. He comes through the front door you have always left unlocked for him. He knows your schedule and your weaknesses and the third page you never read, and he wears a face you have trusted for so long that you have forgotten how to look at it. And what is also true, the thing worth carrying out of all of this, is that the antidote to that danger is not suspicion. It is not walls or cameras or learning to trust no one. The antidote is the kind of life that makes a frightened 19-year-old decide at 9 o'clock at night, with his heart pounding, that you are worth the risk of speaking up for. The boy in that garden did not save a celebrity. He saved a man who had once bothered to learn his name. That, in the end, was the whole of it. In the spring, almost 6 months after the morning behind the garage, Keanu walked out into the garden one Saturday and found Theo home from school on a long weekend, sitting on the low stone wall by the lemon tree, with a notebook open on his knee, sketching the new climbing roses his mother had planted along the south fence. Keanu sat down beside him. For a while neither of them said anything. A hummingbird hung at the feeder for a single suspended second, and then was gone. "You still draw," Keanu said. "My dad used to," Theo said. "My mom says he'd draw on anything. Receipts, napkins, the backs of the bills he couldn't pay." He smiled a little. "I never met him. I just got the hands, I guess. Then you come by it honestly." They sat in the quiet, the wind moving in the eucalyptus above them. "Can I ask you something?" Theo said. "Anything. Do you ever still feel scared about that morning?" Keanu thought about it for a long time, because the young man deserved a real answer, and not an easy one. He looked out across the garden at the small house glowing in the spring light, at the lemon tree, at the workbench, through the open garage door, where a half-built motorcycle waited for hands to finish it. "Sometimes," he said, "not the way I felt it that morning, but every once in a while I'll wake up before dawn, and I'll think about how close I came to walking down that drive and getting on that bike. How 100 ordinary mornings had trained me to not look twice. And what I feel then isn't fear, exactly." He paused. "It's something closer to gratitude, the kind that hasn't quite figured out how to sit still yet." Theo nodded slowly, the way some young people understand things that grown men cannot put into words. "My mom says doing the right thing doesn't always make your life easier," he said. "But it lets you look at yourself in the mirror without having to look away." Keanu watched the light move through the leaves. "Your mom," he said, "has been right about almost everything." And the two of them sat there on the warm stone in the ordinary spring sun, the man who had nearly lost everything, and the young man who had refused to look away, and neither of them needed to say anything more, because some things, once they are understood, do not require words to be kept. If this story stayed with you, even for a moment, do 3 small things before you go. Hit the like button so that more people who need to hear this can find it. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story we tell. And in the comments, tell us about a quiet person in your own life who once paid attention when no one else did, and tell us which city you are watching from tonight. We read every single one, because the most important truth in this whole story is also the simplest. The way you treat the people the world overlooks is not a small thing. One day, it may be the only thing standing between you and the dark. Be kind to the quiet ones. You never know whose voice will one day save your life. This story is a work of fiction created for storytelling and educational purposes. The character of Keanu Reeves is used in a wholly imagined scenario, and all other characters, companies, institutions, and events depicted are entirely invented. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or to actual events, is purely coincidental. This story is intended to explore themes of trust, human dignity, courage, and the worth of every person, and makes no claim about any real individual or organization.